Okay, folks, how are we doing again? Welcome back. So this lecture, I'm going to bring you from the descriptors of Belbin's team roles down into the depths of how these interact and cover them in more detail and the groupings of these different team roles within teams and the issues that can arise. So some really powerful and valuable material in this particular lecture in relation to team and teamwork and the roles and how you perform inside in teams. So let us get down to our lecture. So bring out our slides. And here we have it, and just enlarge them. So, as I was saying, we're going to delve down into the team roles, and here it says entrepreneurial team development. Now, I'll predicate that by saying that it's not just about entrepreneurship. This is any team development. The word entrepreneurial is really in the context of developing something from scratch through to its completion. So that could be a new product in an existing company. It could be the way you want to introduce a new product into a new market. It could be a pure startup environment, which kind of lends itself to this entrepreneurial perception. But as I said, you can actually remove entrepreneurial from the title of this slide and just put in Belbin in the context of team development, and that's critical to understand that. So let's start delving into the real science and nuts and bolts behind what's happening inside in teams. So you see here, you have three things. You have the people, you have a task that needs to be performed, and you have ideas down the bottom here. And you can see the arrows working in both ways. And what do you have here? These are the roles that generally fit into these. So between task and people, you have the completer, the implementer, the team worker. And between people and the ideas, you have the resource investigator, and then you have the plant. Remember the plant person, that creative thinking, that higher intelligent person? God help us. And then between the ideas and the tasks, you have the monitor, evaluator, and shaper. People that get down to the nuts and bolts and see we are on track and doing what's expected of us. And in the middle of this, you have the coordinator, essentially the team leader, so to speak. It's just a role to make sure that all of these are working together. So if we look here, you have, as you can see, implementer, completer, shaper, monitor are all involved in the task element of the idea. And over here you have, or below here you have the coordinator, the monitor, evaluator, the monitor evaluating, looking at the ideas and how they've gone into the task. And then do we need to come up with newer ideas and feed them into new tasks, and that generates more tasks, which requires more ideas and more solutions and so on. And then finally you have this side of it over here again, and then right in the middle again, obviously in this Venn diagram, you have the coordinator inside here. That's keeping things gelled together. It's not the most important role. No one role is more important than the other. That's important to understand. They're just roles, and treat them all at the same level. And this will become important when I describe some of the perceptions and reasons for our behavior later on in this presentation. So you have team tasks. So generally speaking, the explorers are down to the resource investigator and the plant. Organizing, the coordinator, and the implementer. The controlling is around the shaper. And then you have the monitor, which is the monitor evaluator, and then supporting the team worker, getting things done, and imagining the plant, the creative ideas. So these are generally the functions that these combined roles or individual roles contribute towards in terms of exploring ideas, getting us all together, focusing on what has to be done, monitoring the pace and effect that's going, looking for support when needed, and then coming up with ideas and feeding back into this loop, so to speak. So a warning, using Belbin, self-awareness. Now is it beginning to make sense to you why we get you to do these psychometric tests? These are the reasons. So you understand the tasks and roles that you enjoy doing. So we know what we like doing. We like to be implementers. We like to be plants. We like to be coordinators. And these are our preferred choices. But sometimes, depending on the context, you have to take a back seat and say, well, okay, I'll just get on with the work someone is telling me, because the problem is too much, is beyond my ability. I need someone different to be able to explain and communicate precisely what's needed, and then I'll become a shaper and a worker, and I get on and do the thing, and so on. So what role shall I major in? We have our preferred, and who's in our team? Are there more experienced people? Are there people of the same experience? Am I the most experienced person? Am I the most qualified? And all this sort of stuff. So we have combinations of implications and then we have gap filling. So we might have a lean towards all plants, in other words, ideas persons, but we need people to do the work and so on. So we need to have these secondary roles. That's why it says use with caution. Absolutely. So the key point of this is have particular roles and prioritize yourself so you're aware of the types of role, because you'll have to default, because the team might have a gap in a particular area. Monitor, might say, well, I like to be a plant, but I can also be a monitor, or I can be a coordinator, or I can be an implementer, or I can be a shaper, and as the team requires. So people are willing to kind of take on these secondary and tertiary roles, so to speak. That's why we say use with caution. So the team itself, you have these we have a context. We have a reason for coming together as a team. An organization has a reason for coming together as an organization to achieve objectives. Group of people that come together to deliver, present, produce a product or a service. Same with a team. So we can have the psychological state, we have abilities within amongst the members, and we have the personalities who have abilities and their state of mind. That's why all of these are in terms of the behavior of a team. And this becomes critical in terms of understanding of the rate at which the team moves through the stages of team development. So when we're in the right frame of mind, when we're effectively motivated, and when we have the drive, that's our psychological state, and we have clear communication, we know what's expected of us, then we know what abilities we have to meet those expectations. And then our personality, it will determine how much effort we want to put in to get to the right level. And if we feel we're overwhelmed by our personality, our psychological state will change, because we feel we don't have the ability. And also the reverse, if we have an abundance of ability, our psychological state can also have a negative impact, because we're not being challenged. You see why this becomes so important. So if I just go back here, so in terms of our ability, our aptitude, intelligence, education, training, and experience. So combinations of all of these, and we'll have different levels of these abilities. I could say, at 60 years of age, I have aptitude. I would think I have intelligence. I have a lot of education. I've had a lot of training, and I have a bucket load of experience. So what would I bring to a team in that context? Over here we have in the psychological state, and this is really, really important stuff. We have beliefs structure. So what does that mean? We have an image of ourselves. Do we think we're better than we actually are? That's why this whole concept of the psychometric testing and your professional development is important to you, because it gives you a sense of your own self-awareness. Remember I was saying about you can spend too much energy creating this persona, this image of yourself, which isn't truly you. And that uses up emotional energy. And whereas people see this anyway, they see around it. So why bother wasting emotional energy creating a persona that isn't really you? You need to be comfortable in your own shoes. Regardless, you need to be comfortable. And that's important, really, really important. Respect yourself first, and then you'll get the respect from everyone else. Perceive societal norms, what's expected in different groups, the way they function, the way the team functions, the way the company, what's acceptable and what's not. Right now, societal norms, I would say it's disastrous in many respects. And if I take a point in case, I was only having a coffee there earlier on and talked to my wife about this. We're talking about, for example, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. He was giving out yards about, Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls, and Uncle Tom's Cabin, and what's the other, Mark Twain's books, how they're being banned, because of racial commentary and so on and so on, and hard living and so on. And people say, "Oh, we can't have that. They're unacceptable, unacceptable." What a crock of horse's arse! If ever you came across it, and quite rightly, you heard me right, horse's ass, same thing. And the simple reason is, it's history. They were the norms of the day. And it's only by looking back at those and saying, right, you can't say or can't do these things. Well, you shouldn't say or do these things today. But this is how it evolved into the state. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're wrong about the way we're looking at things, trying to reimagine, to use that horrendous word, what should have been the case. So we try to enforce our current societal norms and thinkings onto scenarios or context that existed, 100 years ago. I mean, for crying out loud, it doesn't make sense. That's how we learn. We learn from mistakes. We learn from the way things were done, which were, and I incorrectly said mistakes. These were the way things were done back then. There was nothing wrong with them. So now we do things differently. So we've gotten a little bit overly PC, to use a word. And we've created a whole raft and layer of complexities that really shouldn't be there. If you strip it all away, people are people. Okay, I'm not going off on any more of a rant. Our fear of failure is a psychological state. So, and heuristics and ethics, what we believe to be correct, and our understanding and our heuristics and context in which we operate. We have this fear of failure. Therefore, we tend not to want to put ourselves forward. We won't want to take risks. And this is why the kind of entrepreneurial concept comes into this, risk takers, essentially what an entrepreneur is. So getting over that fear of failure, it's only from that we actually learn. So then we have to have the self-efficacy, belief in ourselves and push ourselves forward, and the motivation, the drive to want to do it. We need to be triggered in terms of our psychological state to want to do something. And then if we look here, if we say that all of this is contextual. And so low context environment equals weak influence on behavior. So if it's not an important issue and such and so on, our behavior is more relaxed, and oftentimes we might not put our best effort in, depending on the criticality or the importance of the context or the environment in which, or it could be a very critical issue, could be very important, but if you have a very toxic environment, you might not like wanting to go into work and work in those environments, even though you might enjoy the actual job, and so on, so on. So you see, everything has an impact. These are the external impacts. So how do we cocoon ourselves from these issues? And this is, again, reliant on these psychometric tests. And so many times I've said it, you've got to cut off stuff that goes on in our lives to focus down on what we have to do right now, working in the team. There could be all sorts of stuff going on in our lives as persons, so to speak, but nevertheless we still have a job to do. That's what you're being paid for. That's not the reason why you're doing it. The reason should be because you're enjoying doing it and you're getting motivation. So high context environment, strong influence on behavior. So again, as I said, the context matters. How the criticality or the importance of the job that has to be done, and the perceived I should say importance of developing something, coming up with a new idea, finding a solution, and in a timely fashion, and so on. These can all influence. So in other words, if there's something that we need to have done by the end of the month, the longer we leave it, then becomes the context environment becomes quite high because we've been pushing it off, and it will be strongly influence our behavior. In other words, we can become a little bit anxious, and sometimes that can be quite good because it gets us to move more efficiently and effectively. Sometimes it can be very negative because the anxiety or the anxiousness of an impending due date or a submission date is so close that your emotions get totally distorted and you can't focus on what you have to do. So getting the pace right is really important. Planning the work and working the plan. Okay. So the problems associated with predicting behavior. So we have a current environment, say, a person, you see at an interview and you have these dates. This is the context. Someone has been interviewed. And then we move on to of a new venture and so on. So probable change in a psychological state and behavior. So someone obviously coming into an interview, they will have levels of anxiety. There will be some levels of fear and so on. Because it's important. It's a short, high burst of energy, and they're trying to sell themselves to you as a company, in a brief, give you a window of opportunity to get a snapshot of who they are, what kind of personality, their abilities, and their psychological state. Move on, we say, you appoint the person. Now they're working in the company, and you could probably see they're a little bit more relaxed state, and their ability has increased because the pressure of finding a job, getting a job, going through the interview process, being accepted by the company is now gone. They've been appointed into the company now. Usually you'll have a probationary period, but the levels of anxiety come down. Now I can make an effort and show what I'm really capable of doing, for example. So clearly, probable change in psychological state and behavior, that actually happens. And it's the same for a new team when you're starting off, when you first meet up together and so on, for sizing people up and so on, the forming part of the team, and eventually you get to the point where you're actually performing and people are more comfortable with each other. They understand, they have respect, they know, they have trust in their team members. They know that they don't have to be hounding this and chasing that and so on. So some people will know exactly what I'm talking about, but there's good team cohesion, as you would have seen in the previous lectures. So there's a concept here we talk about core competencies for entrepreneurial teams, or core competencies for teams. And this is based on some work from Cranfield School or University of Management, School of Management, Cranfield University in the UK. And Cranfield specializes particularly in operations management and supply chain management as such. It was originally a military academy for officer training and all that sort of stuff, and eventually was handed over and became it's one of the better universities in Europe, to say the least. Anyway, they came up with this model here, and if you look at up the very top, you see you have up here, here's my mouse, there it is there, I'll just bring the cursor onto it, here's the mouse. You have shared values for an organization. Similarly, you have them for a team. What's our purpose? What are we trying to do? What's our end objective? And so on. And we develop over time through the forming, norming, and storming. We start to develop these values and acceptables. We have technical expertise within the team. We have marketing expertise, financial. We have self-awareness. And we have personal skill. So you see all this side of it here, the personal side of things and the technical side of stuff down here, all working in a common goal. So they're all inextricably linked in some shape or form. So you might have self-awareness, personal skills, and technical expertise to develop a solution or a course of action that's in line with the overall objectives of the team and indeed the company, of course. And similarly, you might have personal skills, self-awareness, and marketing expertise, again supporting this shared belief. That's the should I say the broad brushstrokes of why this model is showing. Key point: personal awareness. Where is it? There, personal awareness and your personal skills, your training and education. So building and managing relationships in all of these areas. That's what a functioning team does. It builds on these relationships. What you bring to the table and what other people and other experts bring to the table. That's how we build these relationships, the mutual respects, the understandings. And this is where we develop our core competency. So a core competency might be technical expertise, or it might be financial expertise. Essentially, we have skill sets that are important to the actual team. And as you notice, we're talking about all of these as being skills, competencies. Self-awareness is a competence, how well you understand yourself, you know yourself, your abilities to push yourself, and so on. So these are categorized into eligibility, the expertise side of it, the suitability, and on this side. So we have a look, we have to try and get these matches together. So do we have the right people with the right attitudes doing these particular jobs? There is no point in being for example, a marketing expert, and your personality doesn't lend itself to be in marketing. You're too quiet. You're not a non-contributor. You're very passive and all that. That kind of personality doesn't fit in with marketing expertise, or your communication levels are fairly basic. Therefore, how can you be considered to be a marketing expert as such? Because you need to have a different type and approach, an extremely good communicator, and so on, so on. For example, as I said, you remember we talked about this previously, but we have these elements here. So stages in teamwork: the forming, storming, norming, and performing. And note, we don't have the deforming, destorming, denorming, and deperforming crap attached to this model, because it's not necessary. So again, the norming, what can we do? So these are really interesting questions. So what shall we do? What are we about? Why are we here together? Let's see what we can do. What can't we can't do it. So the storming part, so there's that kind of psychological state, oh, this is overwhelming, and so on. Then it moves to norming, because we become more familiar with our own competencies, our own abilities, and we recognize the same in other team members and so on. So you get to this phase of, yeah, we actually can do it, because we have all that's needed, or most of what's needed inside in this team, or in the room, so to speak. And then performing, we're actually doing it. So let's get our heads down. So we know you can do marketing, you can do finance, you can do technical stuff, and yeah, and so on, so on, so on, taking on these roles. And we have the abilities. We might be short on some expertise in some area. Maybe you need something from engineering. That's part of the maturing of the team. We say, we know we need to get it. This is where your investigator role comes in. So they look for resources in other areas to augment or satisfy the gap that we've identified. So failure to establish norms relating to conflict in the early phases of the project. So what are the conflicts? And let's just pop them all out here. So as you can see, I think that's all of them, yeah. We have what's known as cognitive conflict. And that's the most common one as such. So it's issue and task related. So do we have the know-how? Do we have the competency to match, or do we have people that have, some people might have more competency than others, might have more training, more experience, and so on. So there can be a bit of a conflict there. Then we have personal conflicts, this affective conflict. So where things begin to get a little bit personal. That's the dangerous one in it. But as I say, it's how we negate that is we take personalities out of it. That's the phrase we use, such that we say it's bigger than the two of you. We need to work as a team to achieve these objectives. Put your personal differences aside and all this sort of stuff. And happens. And then of course we have role conflict. So we have contradictory or incompatible messages. So for example, the plant who's the person comes up with the ideas and so on, so isn't communicating it effectively to the worker, and therefore they're confused. They don't understand precisely what they have to do, and they like the detail. They need absolute detail to go off and do what they have to do. And if the message isn't clear to them, then you can have an incompatibility between the two roles, because the plant is coming up with creative ideas and so on, and either the implementer or the worker can't get a thorough understanding and be allowed to go off and do what they have to do. And you could have issues around the coordinator, because the coordinator and we say the plant is saying, you're coming up with too many ideas, we can't manage all of these, so and so on. So you can have different role conflicts. So moderate levels of cognitive conflict are associated with better decisions. So what that really means, and this is important, is that you will have people with different skill sets, different competencies, backgrounds, education, knowledge, and so on and so forth, and they can be bouncing ideas. That's healthy. That's where we have constructive critical thinking. Really, really important point through this cognitive conflict. So it's not so much a clash of the smartest brains in the room, but that's the kind of picture. So people, and in actual fact, you'll find that where people are really into it, they come up, hey, have you seen this idea? No, I don't think about that, but what about this one, and so on. And they're actually enjoying it, coming up with great ideas, and it's almost becomes a battle of the brains inside within the team itself. Now, not everyone will be taking part in it. Some people will be sitting back, but they're learning from observing what these two or three people are coming up with ideas. And probably sometimes you're thinking, geez, I wish I was like them. And they went, geez, they come up with great ideas, and look at the way they think about it. That's the important point in terms of the performance of a team. So you're observing how these people are actually interacting. The processes, you're trying to understand the process of how they're coming up and interacting so effectively. And that becomes really important, because eventually you'll start to assimilate those and you bring it to the next team and so on. On the downside of it, we have what are known as the team pathologies. So what are they? Egocentric behavior, status effects, communication bias, risky shift, satisficing behavior, and groupthink. So if you look at this egocentric behavior, senior individuals may refuse to consider opinions of or accept knowledge that runs counter to theirs. So just because I am 60 years of age doesn't mean that I know everything. But that's the perception that can be given out. Oh, we can't say he knows it all, he's around a long time. The more intelligent 60-year-olds will say, oh, geez, that's a fresh way of looking at it, and I've been thinking about it this way for all these years, and that's a much better way of doing it, and so on. So that's how it works in reality. But people do think, because of their status and their age and so on and so forth, because I am, therefore I'm no more than you, and so on, which often isn't the case. Status effects. The views of senior executives tend to be valued and acted upon disproportionately. Simply translated means that just because they're a senior manager or a director or a department head and so on and so forth, they must know everything. They don't. Absolutely don't. Oftentimes, team members know an awful lot more than their manager's manager, and so on, right up to directors or even up to the CEO level. Technical people, for example, will know nuts and bolts and stuff that works far more than their senior managers. But because they're a senior, if they say, well, we should have this kind of a chip in there, or we should write the code like this, maybe, so they must know, therefore we do what they say. Absolutely. Always question why. Not how, what, when, where. Why explains everything. So it's and again, I would have a healthy disrespect for senior managers in organizations, and by that I mean is that they have a role to do, and in that role they should be supporting and enabling us employees to perform to our best. That's how I see it. For example, when I worked in Germany, I was surrounded by engineers with skill sets, they're coming out their ears literally. But it was a challenge, and simply because I had fortunately the wherewithal to understand that I'm only there to facilitate them to be able to do their job, and that's all they wanted. They didn't see they do have a very healthy respect for hierarchy and so on and so forth, but we take away that and enable them to be able to achieve their roles. So I actually saw my role as a department head to enable people to be able to do their jobs far more effectively and with the right resources and so on and so on. Communication bias. Differences in ability to communicate tend to influence the weight given to contributions. So if let's just say you're a weak verbal communicator, but you have a very powerful solution or suggestion and so on, that may come across as a weak solution if you're not communicating it. So sometimes you might say, just hang on, give me a second now, and let me draw this. And you draw the solution out. It's another way of communicating. And people say, oh yeah, I understand this. Or, you can use different mechanisms. But the ability to communicate, and sometimes we might oversell, this is a brilliant idea, we have to do this, and this, and you look at it and say, oh, Jesus, actually, this doesn't make sense at all. This is total horse's ass. So you have to be very careful on how you communicate something. So overselling something can blind people as well as underselling something. Risky shift. So groups tend to make more risky decisions than the average of their members' decisions. So they also tend to be less creative. So, that's a difficult one to kind of translate, but sometimes the group might agree to something and not everyone understands what they're agreeing to, or there's still some doubts around, and that can be a bit of a risky maneuver. So that's why the completer finisher, for example, plays an important role to make sure, have we covered everything? Have we crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and so on? Are we sure we have everything covered? And that kind of perfectionism coming out into the completed work or suggestion or whatever. The satisficing behavior. So a tendency of groups to make minimally accepted decisions. So yeah, let's run with that. It'll do kind of attitude, so just covering the bare minimum. Again, coordinator, implementer, worker, what was the other one I was saying there, the completer. Their roles tend to become a little bit more important in terms of getting the nuts and bolts, the detail right, and the perfectionism coming out. Completion, the completer finisher, for example, getting the perfection. So keep it pushing until we have something that we're essentially that we're proud of, that we've worked on this. It works. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's above and beyond the minimum expectations. So you actually do, behaviorally, you take pride in something like that. And then, of course, the common one, which you probably all would have heard of in terms of pathologies, debt to teams, is group think. So group think may occur in cohesive groups when achieving consensus becomes more important than the quality of the decision. Again, it kind of follows on from that satisficing behavior insofar as that the groupthink is, we'll all go with that. We need to get out of here. It's 5 o'clock. Get the hell out of here. Or we don't want to listen to any new ideas from the plant because we've spent enough time. That's why the coordinator's role becomes a little bit more important in this context, insofar as the pace at which you come up with good decisions, good solutions, and so on, such that you don't just go and like sheep and follow off and say groupthink and off we go, because it is a very common problem within teams as such, when the group is cohesive and achieving consensus becomes more important. So can we all get agreement on this, and we spend more time looking at the personalities and the interactions between people rather than the actual solution itself, why we came together in the first instance. So we're getting up towards the end of it. So in individuals, madness is a rarity, but in groups, it is a rule. So this is the critical thinking. This is the beauty about this. Nietzsche, his commentary. And it's now some would say that I have the benefit of both being mad as an individual and mad in a group. Whatever works. But the point about it is that in groups you have to be creative, you have to think radically, you have to be different, you have to be critical thinkers. Therefore certain levels of eccentricity rather than madness becomes the commonplace, and you do get exuberant behaviors and eccentric behaviors from individuals in a group dynamic, and you find that there might be the joker of the group and this, that, and the other thing, and they're spurred on more, and everyone gets a bit of kick out of stuff and so on. That's the kind of groupthink and madness, that eccentricity that's necessary. In other words, some levels of humor and so on, to be able to instill into the group such that there's safety within the group, rather than the finger pointing, you're a nutcase, as an individual, but collectively we feel safe to be able to behave a little bit outside the norm of our personalities as such. So that's it. That's it, folks. I'm just going to, as you can see, this was from the Centre of Entrepreneurial Learning in Cambridge University. That latter materials in particular. So just let me close out of this. And here we are back to our final stage. Now, folks, there was a lot of material in that, and a lot of explanation on it. Some, I would definitely say there's a lot of value that you can take from these particular lectures into your professional lives, to be honest with you. I try to give you some examples of past experiences from myself and so on. And I can't really emphasize enough how important it is to understand these concepts and aspects, if anything, that you take from college life and work and so on, so are embedded in some of these, how to say, learnings in this in this material. And it should be helping you to understand certain behaviors of teams and team members and so on, and how you can circumvent these. So I would strongly advise you to review all I've presented, both parts, and indeed the series of lectures that I've prepared this week for you and uploaded to YouTube. There is some seriously valuable knowledge inside there that will help you in your current assignments, etc., etc., etc. I don't need to harp on and promote how effective and so your intelligence and common sense will actually prevail, and you will see, that's why this is happening, that's why that's happening, and so on. This is what we need to avoid, particularly in the first section, or first part of these slides, where we talk about the negative impacts on the different team roles, the things to be aware of. Okay, folks. On that, I will leave you. Won't be doing any more video lectures. You have quite a lot of material from this week alone, and I will see you face to face next week, please God. Okay, folks, take it easy. We'll talk to you later. Cheerio. Bye bye.